Hello and welcome to tonight's presentation. I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Greg Wepner is a Principal Consultant and Lecturer with the CCES, specialising in anti-dumping and customs valuation. He has a wide range of customs-specific skills following 37 years' experience with the Australian Customs Service. Greg has conducted training courses throughout Australia and overseas in areas such as tariff classification, value and origin, investigation techniques, anti-dumping and countervailing, WTO and GATT law, and the WCO revised Kyoto Convention on the simplification and harmonisation of customs procedures. Greg actively contributed to the revision of the Kyoto Convention as a member of the WCO Working Party and has represented Australia at many other WCO meetings and meetings at other international organisations such as ICAO and the WTO. During his customs career, he has worked in both a regional port and central office customs environment and also represented customs as an attaché in the US. In central office, he had policy responsibility over a wide range of matters relating to cargo and trade facilitation such as goods declarations, duty concessions, temporary imports and refunds. He has been the government member on the committee which licenses Australian customs brokers. Greg completed his customs career as the Director of Dumping Operations, where he was responsible for the technical anti-dumping input to Australia's negotiation team at the WTA Doha round of trade negotiations. He is currently serving as a WTO panellist, adjudicating an anti-dumping WTO dispute between the USA and Mexico. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce and Associate Membership of the CPA Australia. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Greg now to begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, Lily, and hello there, everybody. Welcome to the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies Continuing International Trade and Border Management webinar series. Tonight, this webinar will provide a very brief overview of the adjustments which are permitted under Article 8 of the WTO Valuation Agreement. In declaring or determining the customs value under the WTO agreement, there is only a discrete number of adjustments that can be made to the price actually paid or payable. So tonight we're going to introduce you to those discrete adjustments, and they are the ones that can be made for commissions, containers and packing, royalties, production assists and proceeds of resale. As well, we'll look briefly at the national treatment discretion that in respect of transport, handling and insurance costs. Now, a word of warning as we start is that this webinar is really most suitable for participants with only a basic knowledge of customs valuation and the WTO Valuation Agreement. And that's because of the limited time that I have with you tonight. We can only really skim the surface of a topic which should entail a great deal more study and explanation. So, why are these adjustments so important? The first question you may really have is, well, why does my government, my customs administration, have to implement and follow the rules of the WTO Valuation Agreement? Well, the simple answer is that membership of the WTO requires you to do so. If your country is a WTO member, then you must implement and follow the rules of the WTO Valuation Agreement. You can only make adjustments to increase the declared value if the rules in Article 8 of the WTO Valuation Agreement allow you to do so. Not following these WTO rules can get the particular WTO member involved in disputes in Geneva, and these are something to be avoided. A further reason why adjustments are important is that they usually have the effect of increasing the customs value. and it follows that legitimately increasing the customs value, it will increase the revenue that is collected. For customs services, protecting the revenue is always a key mission statement. For many countries, though, national revenue gained from import duties is extremely important. These countries need to ensure that the correct duty is collected, as the contribution of those import duties to the national budget is really vital. For traders, the motivation is the reverse. Any increase in duties paid over budget expectations can have a serious impact on the profit that the trader may realise in the sale. Ways then in which these corporations can legitimately minimise their duty outcomes are really intrinsically vital to that to the health of that particular corporate entity. So where have these obligations and rules regarding adjustments and customs valuation come from? And why do we need rules anyway? Well, the obligations start firstly with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or the GATT. Being a WTO member means you must also accept the rules in the GATT. So it's from GATT 1994 that the valuation rules come from, and particularly from Article 7, which says, "The value for customs purposes of imported merchandise should be based on the actual value of the imported merchandise and should not be based on the value of merchandise of national origin or on arbitrary or fictitious values." So that's Article 7 of the GATT, and the key word there is actual value. What does actual value mean, and how might we work out what the actual value might be? Let's first think about what is actual value in an international sales transaction. Looking at these two watches on the screen, is there any difference in the value of these two watches? They are very nearly identical. Both watches have got a 40mm case made of precision steel and 18-carat white gold. They're both waterproof to 100 metres. Both have movements which are mechanical, self-winding and very precise. Both are Swiss-made. The only difference is the trademark. One is branded Rolex and the other is not. It is a genuine Rolex. Is there a difference in the actual value? Well, of course. The Rolex watch is much more valuable, even though the goods are otherwise identical. Simply putting that Rolex trademark with no other changes has made one watch so much more valuable than the other. So when you think about it, value is really hard to define. We'd certainly need more rules to value imported merchandise at the border. So how did the GATT actually define actual value? Well, the GATT did so by defining the actual value as the price paid. Article 7 of the GATT goes on to say, actual value should be the price at which such or like merchandise is sold or offered for sale in the ordinary course of trade under fully competitive conditions. So that's it. The actual value is the price paid. To me, the price is by far the best representation of the value. What better way to really define value? The value to the buyer is what they are willing to pay for it. The value for the seller is what they are willing to sell it for. This just makes sense. Importantly, it is also something then that a third party like customs can observe. Documents are generated in the sale, and these documents can prove to customs what the price was and hence what the value is. So that's it. The value equals the price paid. It should work well all around. Let's think a little bit more about value being the price paid. Now, I know this is a little bit of a diversion, but bear with me, there will be a moral to this story. 2 luxury apartments in this building on Queensland's Gold Coast sold recently. Now, as you might know, the weather in Queensland is beautiful one day and perfect the next. Here there is a fantastic white sandy surf beach of the Gold Coast just across the road from this apartment block. There is 1 apartment per floor. They're identical, the apartments. Each is 450 square metres approximately of luxury apartment, including and featuring 360 degrees views of the Pacific Ocean and the hinterland. There's 3 big bedrooms opening to balconies and 2 bathrooms. You can walk to the restaurants and the shops. Now, here, apartments 13 and apartments 14 were on sale. They were identical apartments with the very same furnishings and fittings. Apartment 14 sold on the 25th of August for $1.15 million Australian. But apartment 13 sold a few days later on the 5th of September for $1,425,000. Nearly $300,000 difference. Now, again, I know this is a diversion from determining the customs value under the WTO Valuation Agreement, but I hope there is some points that we can draw from this. If we are to rely on the price as the key determinant of the value, then we can't be influenced by other events such as other sales or the personal views of the particular customs assessor. The price is the price is the price. But we do need to know what is in the price. Was there anything in these prices that made them so different? Is there some costs or charges or inclusions that are in one and not in the other? If there were any such differences and we needed for some reason to determine the value for tax purposes, we would probably need to make some form of adjustments to the price paid. What would we make adjustments for and what would we leave in the price? Clearly, I think we're going to need more rules about price paid, and the WTO Valuation Agreement spells out these rules for us and ensures that uniform and positive customs valuation determinations are the result. Under the WTO Valuation Agreement, Article 1 is the principal means of determining customs value. Article 1 says, the customs value of imported goods shall be the transaction value. That is, the price actually paid or payable for the goods when sold for export to the country of importation, adjusted in accordance with the provisions of Article 8. Now, most customs valuation determinations are made on this basis, but remembering our Queensland apartments, we need to know what is in these prices because the rule in the WTO agreement says we must adjust the price in accordance with Article 8. What is in the price? Well, transportation and insurance are key considerations in the price of any international sales transaction. Think about the costs and charges that arise in moving the goods from the factory of the seller in one country to the store of the buyer in another country. First off, you have to be the packing of the goods for export, the freight to get the goods to the border, any costs associated here with the export formalities, storage, loading, handling charges that might occur at the port of exportation. the ocean freight and ocean insurance to get the goods to the place of importation, any costs associated with the unloading of the goods, duties and taxes as they arrive in the country of importation, and certainly also the freight to get the goods to the importer's store. It's really the case that international trade is a very expensive business. Now, the price paid or payable could include none of these costs or charges. It could include some of these costs or charges, or it could include all of these costs and charges. This will really depend on what the buyer and the seller have agreed in setting or agreeing to the price. There are lots of other charges and costs, such as financing costs, that could also be in the price when the contract of sale is agreed. There are rules in the WTO Valuation Agreement which set out what should not be in the price, and we really need firstly to make those allowable deductions first. Unfortunately for tonight, we don't have enough time to review those allowable deductions to the price, and we're going to move straight on to the allowable adjustments under Article 8. Remember that the definition under Article 1 requires us to make adjustments in accordance with Article 8. So what does Article 8 say? Article 8 says, in determining the customs value under the provisions of Article 1, there shall be added to the price actually paid or payable for the imported goods. Article 8 then goes on to spell out what can be added to the price. Before we look at that, what can be added, it's important to note that Article 8 is an inclusive provision. That is, only the costs and charges that are itemised and listed in Article 8 can be added to the price. Nothing more. So let's see what those allowable additions are. Under Article 8, these are the only costs and charges that can be added to the price. Commissions and brokerage, except buying commissions, containers and packing and some transport costs, production assists, royalties and license fees, and proceeds of resale. Now we're going to look at each of these allowable adjustments a bit closer, but first there is a couple of other important parts to Article 8. Article 8.1a says the following: to the extent that they are incurred by the buyer but are not included in the price actually paid or payable for the goods. So these costs or charges we're going to look at can only be added to the price actually paid or payable if they are incurred by the buyer but they are not already included in the price. So that is that there's no double dipping. You can't add them twice, and this really is only fair. Article 8.3 is also a very important provision. Article 8.3 says additions to the price actually paid or payable shall be made under this article only on the basis of objective and quantifiable data. So customs must have sufficient evidence to quantify these costs or charges accurately. It cannot be what customs or the trader thinks the cost might be. A further important provision in Article 8 is Article 8.4. Article 8.4 says no additions shall be made to the price actually paid or payable in determining the customs value except as provided in this article. This makes it clear that the Article 8 adjustments are the only allowable additions that can be made to the price. Okay, so let's look a little more closely at the Article 8 adjustments themselves. You remember that we said that the only allowable additions to the price were these items on the screen now. Let's firstly look at commissions and brokerage. Reading from the text of Article 8.1, it says the following to the extent that they are incurred by the buyer but are not included in the price actually paid or payable for the goods: commissions and brokerage, except buying commissions. This is an important exception, and about buying commissions is an important exception, and in practice can be a quite complex issue for both customs and for traders. So how do you distinguish a buyer's agent from a selling agent and their commission? Well, some of the things to think about are: what can be added are the fees or commissions paid to agents or brokers. Agents and brokers are intermediaries in the sales transaction, and they're not principals to the sales transaction. Agents don't take title or ownership of the goods and are not responsible or bear any risk for the loss or damage of the goods as they're transported from A to B. Selling agents are engaged by and work for the seller. Buying agents are engaged by and work for the buyer. To some, the words agent and broker are simply interchangeable ones. But to others, a broker is a special type of agent who works for both the buyer and the seller. These brokers usually work with bulk commodities like petroleum products, chemicals like PVC, wheat and other grains. Okay, remember Article 8 only allows for a discrete number of costs and charges to be added. Let's now look at containers and packing and overseas transport. Again, reading from the text of Article 8.1, there shall be added to the price the cost of containers which are treated as being one for customs purposes with the goods in question, and the cost of packing, whether for labour or materials. So let's think about this a bit. Certainly packing is straightforward, and to note that it includes the cost of both materials and labour. The containers that are referenced are the ones that are sold as one with the goods. So it doesn't mean or refer to international shipping containers. It's the blister packs. It's the retail packs that goods are put up in. So when we're referring to packing materials here, we're referring to those type of containers, being retail packs, bags, boxes, blister packs and so on. But packing materials also include the export boxes or crates or pallets or drums that the goods are exported in. And it also includes the packing materials such as straw or styrofoam or bubble packs or so on. Remember, it also Article 8 also said to include the labour in packing. So that's the cost for placing the goods in the containers, for sealing those containers up, for vacuum packing and boxing and so on. Things like placing goods on racks or hangers in containers, and any of the fumigation or environmental conditioning that export goods are subject to. Now, in regard to transport costs, we find that the agreement provides a particular discretion. Article 8.2 says, in framing the legislation, each member shall provide for the inclusion in or the exclusion from the customs value in whole or in part of the following: the cost of the transport of the imported goods to the port or place of importation, loading, handling and unloading and handling charges associated with the transport of the imported goods to the port or place of importation, and the cost of insurance. WTO members can choose to include or to exclude the transport costs to the port or place of importation, or as many of you would know it, the CIF point, or when the goods arrive at their destination point. Most countries do include all the transport costs to the place of importation or the CIF point. Two exceptions are Australia and the United States. There are at least 2 WTO members who have exercised their discretion here under Article 8.2 and only include the transport costs to the place of exportation, or again, as many of you would know, the FOB point, or where the goods are loaded on the vessel at the departure point. Let's look at that diagrammatically. Because of the discretion in Article 8.2, we have the following situation. Freight from the seller's factory to the port or place of exportation is included in the customs value. Marine freight and insurance from the port of exportation to the port of importation is either excluded, as in the United States and Australia, or included, as in the EU and most other countries in the world, depending again on the exercise of the discretion in Article 8.2. The freight from the port of importation to the past the customs barrier to the buyer's store is always excluded from the customs value. Okay, we remember that Article 8 only allows for additions to the price to be made on the basis of objective and quantifiable data. Let's now look at production assists. So what are production assists? Article 8.1b tells us. It says the value, apportioned as appropriate, of the following goods and services where supplied directly or indirectly by the buyer, free of charge or at a reduced cost for use in connection with the production and sale of the imported goods. So this relates to particular goods or services which are supplied free of charge or at a reduced cost by the buyer to the seller of the goods. Obviously, if these assists are provided free of charge, they won't be included in the price that the seller charges the buyer for the manufactured goods. Article 8 says we can add them in. An example might be if an Australian trader bought and sent some Egyptian cotton fabric free of charge to a tailor in Hong Kong to make that cotton into business shirts, and those business shirts were subsequently exported to Australia. The supply of that fabric would be regarded as an assist and could be added to the price. Article 8.1b goes to some detail about which particular goods and services can be added as production assists. There are 4 categories of assists. These are the goods or services which, when supplied free of charge or at a reduced cost by the buyer to the seller for the use in the production or sale of the exported goods. Materials, components, parts and similar items which are incorporated in the imported goods. Tools, dyes, moulds and similar items used in the production of the imported goods. Materials consumed in the production of the imported goods. Engineering, development, artwork, design work and plans and sketches undertaken elsewhere than in the country of importation and necessary for the production of the imported goods. These assists can be added. Just as an example of what might be regarded as assists, consider the assist that might be provided to make this particular tractor. Firstly, the steel to make the tractor parts, the tools or the tooling to form the steel into tractor parts, the grease that may have been consumed in making the tractor, and the plans or the design work that was necessary to actually make the tractor. All those things are possibly able to be added under the adjustments of Article 8. Okay, let's now move on with the allowable adjustments that can be made. Remember, we said Article 8 only allows for the adjustments to the extent that the costs and charges are not already included in that price. The next on the list is royalties and license fees. These are perhaps the most litigated aspects of customs value adjustments around the world. So why are they royalties so contentious? Well, I suppose if you remember how we had that earlier slide with the identical watches, but one had the Rolex brand, we said that even though those watches were otherwise completely identical, the Rolex watch was much more valuable. It makes sense then, if the buyer has to pay a royalty or a license fee to import the branded or trademarked watch, then that royalty or license fee should be added to the price. Where it becomes contentious is that these are usually off-invoice charges and subject usually to very complex contractual agreements or arrangements. The trader, of course, wants to minimise their duty and tax burden at the border and looks to ways in which these contracts and fees do not meet the tests that must be passed before these royalties and license fees must be added to the price under Article 8. So what are these tests? Article 8.1c says royalties and license fees related to the goods being valued that the buyer must pay either directly or indirectly as a condition of sale of the goods being valued, to the extent that such royalties and fees are not included in the price actually paid or payable. So under the contractual arrangements, the royalty or license fee must be payable on the actual goods being valued at the border and not in relation to some other goods. Sometimes the imported goods are subject to further assembly or processing after importation, and the actual license fee is payable on the production of those upstream goods and not actually related to the imported goods. It's also the case that sometimes the royalty or the license fee is payable on the right to reproduce the imported goods, rather than being related to the actual goods being imported. So the key here is that the fees must be related to the value, to the goods being valued. It's also the case that there must be an obligation for the buyer to pay the royalty or license fee as a condition of sale of the goods being valued. So the key question here is whether the buyer could purchase the imported goods without paying the royalty fee. If they could, then the fee payment is not a condition of sale. Now these tests and implications are really very complex, and unfortunately we don't have any really further time to dig deeper into this particular topic. I'm a bit sorry for that, because it's a really interesting and important area, and one which we could quite easily spend quite a very long webinar on this topic of royalties alone. So let's move on, if we can, to our final allowable addition to the price, being proceeds of resale. What are these proceeds? Well, these proceeds of resale arise in situations where the goods are sold, but the parties simply agree to delay the full payment, the payment of the full purchase price, until the revenue for a subsequent resale in the country of importation is realised. For instance, the goods might be sold for $100 a unit plus 5% of the profits of the goods when they are resold in the importing country. Article 8.1d says that we can add the value of any part of the proceeds of any subsequent resale, disposal or use of the imported goods that accrues directly or indirectly to the seller. So the real issue here is that for customs, at the time the goods are being valued at the border, the actual amount that will constitute the full purchase price is unknown or not known yet. Remember, we've stressed that additions to the price must only be made on the basis of objective and quantifiable data. We can't simply estimate what the proceeds might be. So what do? Well, the agreement and really normal customs practice provides one solution. We could release the goods on a security or guarantee that the importer will pay the customs duty that may be owed once the quantum of the proceeds of the resale is known and the final purchase price finally established, and then determine the valuation at that later stage. And we could employ a conditional release procedure to be agreed with the importer, and the payment of duties is then simply delayed. So this brings my presentation to an end, but just a couple more things before we open up the webinar to questions. If you are at all interested in any further study or training, the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies here at the University of Canberra offers customs valuation as a postgraduate elective in our Master of International Customs Law and Administration degree, and in other CCES University of Canberra programs. We also offer customs valuation as a non-award vocational course or as a short course, and these would be available all the year round, and we could certainly tailor such short courses to suit the needs of your particular administration. If you would like any further information about any further study options, the contact details are on the screen now, and I'll leave those details on the screen for you while we move on to any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks Greg. We will just filter through the questions now, so please be patient with us. I'll just mute us and we'll be back with you in a minute. Okay, so we have received quite a few questions. We'll start with a question from Khalid from Jordan. He has asked, your slide said that you can only make additions to the price if you have objective and quantifiable data to do so. What happens if you do not have this? And I'll hand the microphone over to Greg.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much, Khalid. Yes, I did make that point all the way through. In a case where you are satisfied that you need to make an adjustment under Article 8, but you don't have objective and quantifiable data to make that adjustment, then what must happen is that the transaction value must be rejected, and you must look then further to the valuation agreement for the next way or method to be able to determine the customs value. Now, tonight we've only talked about one method of determining the customs value, and that's the transaction value method. The agreement really sets out other methods of establishing customs value, and it sets them out in a hierarchical order and allows us to be used if we can't establish the transaction value. We must then resort to these. Subjectively or notionally estimating what the cost or charge might be is simply not allowed, Khalid. There must be really supporting evidence to make these adjustments to additions to the price. Now, I know we haven't had time to discuss these other methods tonight, but Perhaps we could do another webinar, Lily, on these alternative methods at some time in the future. But it's important to note that even if there is a limitation on using the transaction value, then the WTO agreement will provide an alternative or another way in which that can be done.
Okay, thanks Greg. I can see a number of questions have come through, are still coming through, and I can see that a number of participants have raised their hand. Now, if I could just ask you to please type in your question there. Anna Kelly, if you could just type in your question, that would be great. Now, we'll just move on to the next question. We do have quite a few, so I'm not sure that we will be able to get through all of them tonight. So we'll just move on to the next one. Angela, I believe she's located in the UK today. Her question is, why are buying commissions excluded? Why are they an exception? And that's over to Greg now.
Well, Angela, thank you very much for the question. Yes, it's an interesting one, all right. Well, I think there's two possible reasons why. The first is, if you think about it, a selling agent's fee would normally just be one of the expenses that the seller would incur, and you would expect that this expense would be a consideration that the seller would make in setting the price for their goods. You know, just like every other product or overhead expense, the seller would be including that in their calculation of what they have spent to make and sell the goods, and then adding their profit and then offering their goods for sale on that basis. If there was an obligation for the buyer to pay the seller's agent directly, it's a bit like an indirect payment to the seller. The seller doesn't then have to pay their agent their fee in the normal manner. On the other hand, when a buyer pays his agent a fee, there's no real benefit to the seller. It won't have affected how the seller has set their price. So no one would really, so one wouldn't be expected. So one would be expected to be in the price, and one would not be expected to be in the price. And I think that's the main reason why it's there. A second reason, Angela, might be, and this is a little bit more theoretical, this one, it might be that the exception was provided as a practical means to ensure that smaller traders are not disadvantaged. Now, if you think about it, smaller traders are much more likely to use the services of a buying agent to help them with their overseas purchases than, say, a larger trader, say a multinational. Larger traders would have more resources and even might be able to set up an office in the exporting country for purchasing purposes. So it could have been with that intention too, to not disadvantage the smaller trader. It's interesting, Angela, one of the proposals that India put to the Uruguay round was that this exception be removed. India said that it just makes things more complex and difficult, and they said particularly for developing countries. Well, it certainly does, and makes things more difficult, so it's sort of easy to agree with India's point of view in that respect. So, Angela, thanks for your question. That was a good one.
Okay, thanks, Greg. We will just take a couple more minutes to try and filter through the questions that have come in. So please just bear with us. I will mute us just for a few minutes. Okay, moving on to the next question. As I said earlier, I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of the questions tonight, but we will do one more, and I've picked this one because it's quite a good question, but it's also come from our cousins on the East Island of Australia, New Zealand. Bruce from New Zealand has asked, why is it that Australia and the USA chose to exclude overseas freight and insurance from the customs value? And By the way, you forgot New Zealand. We also have a customs value on an FOB basis, typical Aussie. So thanks, Bruce. We'll pass that out. I'll get Greg to answer that.
Oh, well, thanks, Bruce. Bruce, certainly apologies for forgetting New Zealand. The answer to this particular question is, I think, a little bit lost in history. I know that for Australia we've always excluded ocean freight and insurance. I can remember being taught as a young customs officer that the reason for this was that we were so far away from our major trading partners, and the freight was so expensive that it really would be unfair on traders and consumers, and really provide sort of too much protection for Australian industry if the marine freight and insurance costs were included in the customs value. On the point though, it's always seemed to me to be a little bit disappointing for the agreement that this discretion exists, especially as the agreement is really all about making valuation determinations uniform and standard around the world. As I understand it, this was a bit of a deal breaker when in getting international agreement between the European Union and the USA to the GATT valuation code, and now the WTO Valuation Agreement. Neither would really budge from their existing methodologies, so the discretion was really the only option to get consensus at that time. So Bruce, I hope that answers your question, and again, humble apologies for forgetting that New Zealand was also used their valuation discretion on an FOB basis.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg. Okay, so we do actually have far too many questions to get through tonight. We have gone over time, so I am going to have to cap the questions there. Greg has very kindly said that he will answer the questions that have come through personally, so he will write to you at some stage over the next couple of days answering your questions if we can. There is just one more question that I'd like to read out. Oh, sorry, a remark that I'd like to read out from Phil Norley in the UK. He's a recent graduate of our master's program and is currently studying the Master of International Revenue Administration, I believe. He says, thanks, Greg, a very interesting presentation. Some of the provisions you've outlined under Article 8 are indeed complex. In light of that, I guess it is very difficult for the customs officer on the ground, practically speaking, to making a determination about whether any of these adjustment factors actually apply at the time of processing an import declaration. So thanks, Phil, for your comments. As I said, we do highly value everyone's comments, so we will have to leave it there tonight. I'd like to thank Greg for a very informative presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it and found it useful, and judging by the number of questions that have come through, I expect you did. Please take the time to complete the online survey that I'll be sending you out tomorrow, as we do very strongly value your opinion. As Greg mentioned, these courses are available not only as part of our postgraduate programs, but also as vocational courses, and these can be designed for government agencies and private industry. If your organisation is interested in a tailored course, then please send me an email with your inquiry so that we can start discussions. Here at CCES, we are always willing to discuss opportunities to tailor programs to meet the specific operational requirements of your organisation. Thanks again for attending our webinar today. I hope you can all join us again for our next free webinar within our International Trade and Border Management webinar series. The next one and the last one will be Topic 6, Tariff, and that will be presented by our Senior Lecturer Brian Thomas on the 17th of October 2012 at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again, and I'll be closing the webinar now. Have a great day.